Okay. Okay, and here we go. All right, let me get back. Now this is that part, Mr. I have to go backwards and it won't let me go back. There we go. All right, good evening, everyone. This program this evening is to celebrate the end of your sophomore year and also to talk about practical things over the summer that you can do to get ready to be a junior. And so with that in mind, I want to welcome all of you juniors. So sophomores, you are now rising juniors and you are now stepping into that assistant leadership or leadership position in our school. And that's a really exciting time. It's been challenging this year. You've learned a lot. You've learned a lot about yourselves and you are ready to do this. So an overview of this evening, we are going to have some reflections from Mr. Kempf from school counseling on being a sophomore. We're going to look ahead to junior year with myself representing my team for college counseling. We're going to then talk with Mr. Mueller, is going to talk about some opportunities coming up to be even more involved with the SLUH community and leadership. And then our feature presenter tonight is Dr. Tim Bono from Washington University, and he's going to talk about a summer to grow on, some tips that will help you this summer to be prepared to be the strongest leader you can be, the strongest student as a junior next year. So with that in mind, I am going to call onto the screen Mr. Walt Kempf from school counseling, and see, there we go. All right, and I'm going to pop off and take it away, Mr. Kempf.
Thank you, Ms. Floyd. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm kind of setting the table for tonight in a certain way, in that I'm talking about adolescent development, and that is obviously a very big topic. It's the stuff of entire semesters worth, and I've got 5.5 minutes. So let me just put a context before I talk about the topic of the day, cognitive growth spurts. And that framework is this: adolescent development is really on a long time frame. And I want to ease anxiety, and I don't want parents to be in the position of thinking, oh my Lord, I'm behind, or my son is behind. It's okay. So just take two instances, take driving and take reactions to pandemic. What I have seen with sophomores regarding driving is this: some of them cannot wait. They are chomping at the bit to go driving, and others are like, no, not yet. I'm not there yet. And both of those things are okay. There is a spectrum of development. The same thing with the pandemic. Some kids are happy as clams to be at home with their parents, and some are just stifled by this experience. Some are really languishing, but others are really good. So there's a broad spectrum of teenage development, and I want to ease that anxiety. And what I want to invite parents, especially, is just to breathe into this, to trust God's plan and how it will unfold. I think for parents, our role is curious, questioning and listening, and gentle nudging occasionally. And if our kids are trying to grow and learn, things will work out. So Ms. Floyd, I know that you asked me to talk about the cognitive growth spurt in particular, but I feel like I would be a little remiss if I didn't also point out one other facet of teenage growth and development. And that is this: I think the best way I name this is this: teenagers experience a mandate to grow up, whatever that means. It incorporates kind of their sense of, hey, it's time for me to move from childhood. I'm in high school now. I need to start becoming a man. And so it can look like things as simple as the Lego sets go away, never to return. The Tinker toys go away, because those are the things that little kids do. So I need to be the big guy now. So there's kind of this mandate to be a full man now, whatever that means. turning away from the things of childhood, turning towards the future is important. And mom and dad, I want to let you know this is kind of a hard thing for you sometimes. One of the things that happens is that they also turn away from you to a certain extent because you are the prime symbol of their childhood. And so they kind of tend to move away from you to a certain extent. And that can hurt, but they still need you. Please know that. So now the main event, a cognitive growth spurt. The physical growth spurt is the thing that gets everybody's attention. I have seen sophomores come to my office the second semester, and I'm like, whoa, you grew 5 inches and put on 15 pounds. It's so obvious. Less obvious, but just as real, is there is a cognitive growth spurt. And what happens is this. Thinking literally moves from concrete to very abstract. Your sons are now capable of more abstract thinking. Things are not as concrete as they used to be. And with that comes analytical thought and critical thought. And I also mean critical in the sense of judgmental. They start looking at the world and they start realizing, hey, there's aspects of this world that are not pretty and don't make sense to me, and it's not fair. And you will often hear about that, or you might not hear about that. One of the things that happens in teenagers is this feels very much like a new toy that they get to play with. If you pair this truth, this reality that they're thinking new thoughts at different levels, and they also want to turn away from the things of childhood, they often go to their rooms by themselves, or they want to go out and discuss things with their friends. And so those things both happen. The thinking is now kind of a toy that they play with. They might step away from you as a function of that mandate, as a function of turning away from childhood. Another implication of this is that they will start pruning away things. And this is also can be painful for parents. When your son or daughter who has taken piano lessons for the last 9 years announces, I'm done with that. That can be difficult. What's going on though is they are pruning away. They're starting to think about what's my place in the world. There's a whole thing about identity formation here too. Where do I belong? Where do I fit? What are my talents? Where am I going to go in life? Let me give you 2 quick examples, concrete examples. I recently had a student come to my office who is an athlete, and he is realizing the level to which he's probably capable of playing. And it's not going to be in the bigs. It's not going to be in the NHL or NFL. It's not. And so he is taking stock. He's thinking critically, and he's realizing, ooh, I kind of let my academics slide. I need to get back on my academics because that's going to be my ticket more than what I thought was going to be my ticket before. So that's just one example of pruning away. Another example, I had another young man come to me earlier this year who was interested in a career in writing and journalism. And he was taking stock of where he was. And he was realizing, I'm overextended. I am involved in too many things. I'm working a part-time job and I'm too thin. And I'm going to need to cut loose some of these other involvements that I am in so I can focus more and get better at this thing that I think I love. Now, here's an interesting thing. This student recently came back and said, yeah, I'm thinking about going a different direction. But I wonder if that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't taken the time to pare some things down and really check this one thing out. Now he's moving in a different direction. So there's a pruning that happens. Last thing I want to talk about is that your sons, and again, there's a big spectrum. Some of them are already thinking deeply about this, and some of them have no idea what they want to do, but they are starting to contemplate college. And some of that is in part to the work that the school counselors do as preparation for what's coming up for them in the junior year. Moms and dads, I do want you to hear this. When they first start talking about college, they will often say, I'm going to go to California, or I'm going to go to Florida or Colorado. And just be with that and let it be. Because oftentimes the realities of life will end up, they generally end up closer to home, but they're playing with this new toy and they're thinking about possibilities. Now, the school counselors, especially with freshmen, we are so focused on their adjustment to school and the rigors of SLUH and how they're getting along with their classmates and whether they're, feeling connected and how their study habits are. So we're really checking in on their adjustment. But even as we do that, we are asking key questions. What lights your world on fire? What are you supremely interested in? Do you know that about yourself? What do you think is really good inside you? And where do you just lose track of time because you love doing something? So that kind of line of questioning is there, even with the freshmen. And then when they get to be sophomores, we start making it more intentional about college. And I would call it, we do the broad brushstroke work. We're asking them to think more intentionally about, well, do you think you want a big school or a medium school or a small school? What kind of size might you want to try on? How far from home might you want to be? How far is too far? How close is too close? We ask them, do you have any inklings or thoughts about what you might want to sink your teeth into when you're in college? And we're always careful to say, it's okay if you don't have that all formed. It really is. You'll still have time. So let's talk about what you do next couple of years to really start trying some things on and seeing if you do like them deeply. So that's the groundwork that the school counselors put in place. And then what happens, and I'm going to turn it over to Elaine, is the college counselors will take it up in greater depth in the junior year. And that's a great point to say back to you, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kempf. So I'm going to take a moment, if my computer will let me do this, and share some of the things that are coming up with the college counseling team. So I'm going to frame it by giving some advice to sophomores or juniors now and their parents. And that's from Chris O'Brien from Boston College. And when asked, what makes a strong application? And he will say to SLUH students, do SLUH well, do SLUH well. And so with that in mind, I'm going to introduce my colleagues. They're going to pop on screen. You're going to see a lot of us over the next few years, I promise you. So just for the moment, I'm going to have Mr. Crimmins give us a wave, and that's Mr. Kevin Crimmins, who's the Director of College Counseling.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, there you go. Mrs. Kate Kimbom, give us the wave.
Hi there.
And Mr. Daniel Shields.
Good evening, everyone.
There you go. Alrighty. So thank you guys. Tomorrow, I will email out a copy of this presentation along with this handout. I know it's tiny on the screen, but you'll be able to see it. And it's an overview of the different things coming up over the next 2 years, which includes the standardized testing and different elements of your college applications and the different components as you're going to be putting those together. A common question we get is, when am I going to meet with the college counselors? And so this is an overview of our meeting timelines. In November of next year, we will have our junior family kickoff, and you'll be assigned your school counselor or your college counselor. And then we'll have getting to know you meetings with the students. We'll have family meetings, check-ins. We'll have workshops, senior application meetings, senior meetings, and lots of other programming. So you're going to have a lot of connection with us over the next 2 years. Some other common questions are, what if I have a question in the meantime? And you are welcome to reach out to any of us at College Counseling, and we will answer your questions. Your college counselor, again, is assigned in November at the kickoff meeting. We also get asked about ACTs. We advise that you wait until February or December at the earliest, and it's because of your math preparation. When you do sign up, don't send scores for the first testing, and we'll advise you more on that later. You can do some prep for the PSAT if you're typically in the top 2 or 3% of test takers. You'll know that from your sophomore PSAT, and we can advise you on that, or your school counselors can also advise you on that. Colleges don't see your PSAT scores, but it's great. It's a great practice test for you. And then the most important thing are your junior grades to get ready for college next year, and your relationship with your teachers. So that involvement in your classes. And then the last tip I have for right now is to take a campus tour this summer, whether it's local or while you're traveling, just to get the feel for the elements of college and if possible, get on to a college campus. So with that in mind next, I am going to ask Mr. Bradley Mueller to come on and let us know some things about some activities, again, doing SLUH well, that are coming up with Student Council.
Thanks, Ms. Floyd. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for letting me chat with you guys for a few minutes here. I know everyone is exhausted, so I'm going to keep this quite short. So junior year, as you all have probably heard and can expect, is going to be a wild ride, a roller coaster of sorts. And from our perspective, in terms of student involvement and student council, this is typically a year when students really start to feel their vibe as to what clubs they really like and what their passions are. And I'm glad that Walt stated that earlier, that there's kind of this balance between trying some new things out, but also pruning away. And so with student activities, what we really encourage the guys to do is try something new, try something you haven't tried before, even though you are a junior. Give a little bit more time maybe to something that you're more passionate about, and do that well. Just kind of like Miss Floyd said, I think sometimes junior year, the guys get caught up in well, let's do as much as I can, because that's the best way to prepare. Some guys that works really well for, and other guys not so much. So I guess our recommendation from STUCO is certainly don't be afraid to get involved in something new, but also take that focus and focus it a bit more on something that you're extremely passionate about. As you guys can read on the slide, there's tons of different ways to get involved your junior year. And this is kind of where the brotherhood that the guys speak about really starts to become tangible and palpable amongst the class, because there's a lot more intentional activities for the class. And by this time, guys have gotten to meet a majority of their class. And so as you can see there's the junior night events. Guys have an opportunity to form their class motto and become really involved in the planning for Junior Ring. Junior Ring is kind of one of these rites of initiation passages, and is a really special and important event for these guys. So throughout the year, a lot of the activities for junior year are building towards that event. As a junior, the guys are now upperclassmen. So there's this idea of leadership and development of qualities of a leader. And so in a lot of the activities, we really are looking for juniors to step up to the plate and do their part. And so whether that's Spirit Week or Mission Week, the entire school is a part of that activity. And these are opportunities where juniors have a huge impact in how the weeks go. The applications for Blue Crew went out today, and there's a lot of opportunities next year, especially the STUCO this year is kind of calling it the new SLUH next year. Because there haven't been a lot of activities that students have been able to get involved with this year, it's going to feel like a new SLUH next year, and that can be really exciting. And it gives a really good opportunity for some juniors to step up and do some really big things to make the spirit of the school alive and well. Intramurals are going to be back hopefully next year, fingers crossed. And so with those in mind, there's going to be a lot of friendly competition, but also opportunities to help organize sports so that guys can play outside, play inside, be on teams, and form some collegiality that way as well. The schedule for next year, what will be coming here in the next couple of weeks is this schedule next year is going to really allow for students to be able to spend more time together at school. And with that in mind, there's going to be a lot of time to be with clubs, those that are new, those that have existed, and those that your sons know well. So that time for, again, building some collegiality and brotherhood will certainly exist. So be on the lookout for those opportunities. And as always, the activity fair, as your sons know, is in late August, but we always encourage that juniors not only attend with the clubs that they're a part of, but also at some point in that activities fair, explore some new clubs. The website is a great resource for this stuff, and I would encourage you to encourage your sons to actually check out the website and see what clubs do exist that they might not even have known existed, or may have been new since their freshman year and maybe something that they're interested in. So take a re-peek at the website for that. And then the biggest thing that I guess I could encourage from a moderator standpoint is we tend to get to know students the best their junior year. And that happens in the most random of circumstances when kids step up that you wouldn't normally expect to step up. And your son could certainly be that student. So encourage them to go to as many events as possible, be as involved as possible. But at the same time, even from STUCO's perspective, we always say academics first. So you have to love yourself before you love anything else or anyone else. And so if they're stable in their academics, activities will certainly follow from that. But we've also seen that activities have spurred some really great academic growth for students as well. So certainly if you have any questions after tonight, feel free to reach out to Mrs. Many and I, but this summer is going to be a great opportunity for growth for your sons in many, many ways. And so will next year. So we're very excited. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mueller. You and Mrs. Many have done a wonderful job with STUCO and followed in the strong path of Mrs. Toussaint as well. All right. So now it's my great honor to introduce our speaker for this evening. Dr. Tim Bono has been a long friend of SLUH, is at Washington University in St. Louis, and he is Assistant Dean, College of Arts and Sciences, and lecturer in Psychological and Brain Sciences. He has done quite a few programs for our seniors on successful transition to college and happiness in college. But it seemed an appropriate time, especially with all of the changes with the pandemic, to speak to our sophomores. So it's a special treat for you guys that Dr. Bono is going to talk a bit about success and happiness and staying on track here at SLUH with the summer to grow on and some tips for you and your family. So Dr. Bono, would you like to take over the screen?
Yes, thank you. It looks like I'm getting a message. Oh, yep, since you've stopped sharing yours, looks like I can share mine. Thank you. All right, well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be with you. As Ms. Floyd mentioned, I am a faculty member at Washington University, just on the other side of Forest Park. My favorite role, though, is that I happen to be the uncle of two SLUH students. So if anybody knows Joey Weinbauer and Vincent Weinbauer, they are my nephews. So I was invited to develop a presentation for you all that drew on some psychological research that we hope will be helpful and useful for you to maximize your summer in a way that can position you for some of the ideas that Mr. Kempf was talking about when he talks about those cognitive growth spurts and identity formation. There's some real opportunities to harness that as early as this coming summer to position you to be to successfully transition from your next 2 years of high school to be as successful as you can, to position you then to be successful in college and beyond. Now, to look ahead towards summer and junior and senior year, sometimes it's worthwhile to look back and consider where we've been. And I want to share with you an article that appeared just a couple weeks ago in The Guardian. And the title of this article is "Lockdown Made Me Do It: How We Lost Our Willpower, from Vegetarians Tucking into Battered Sausages to ethical shoppers splurging on fast fashion. Many of us have abandoned our better lifestyle choices in lockdown." And the author then goes on to describe a bit of what her own experiences have been. I think most, if not all of us, can relate to this article, that a lot of our habits around studying or diet or exercise or self-discipline have largely fallen to the wayside over the last year with all of the stress that the pandemic has brought for us. So even people who were normally very ordered and highly self-disciplined have become a little bit less ordered and less self-disciplined over the last year. So I'd like to talk about some of the research that psychologists have done that can provide us some ideas of how we can get that back in order so that we can make sure our self-discipline is top-notch to capitalize on some of those cognitive growth spurts that Mr. Kempf was talking about. So when we look at willpower as a psychological phenomenon, it's defined very simply as the capacity to override impulses and temptations. Or where sometimes you're like Ziggy here, it's not willpower I need, it's won't power. Well, the way that psychologists have studied this phenomenon is by bringing people into lab situations and giving them something that a lot of people have difficulty saying no to, which is a plate of cookies. So in the classic studies, these were done with young children. They brought them into the lab and they put these cookies in front of the kids, and the children were told that they could either have 2 cookies now, or if they could wait 10 minutes when the experimenter returned, they could have 4 cookies. So in other words, do you want to give into a small temptation that feels good now, or override that impulse and temptation for a larger reward later on? And then they had a bell that the kid would ring if they couldn't override the temptation any longer. And they kept track of how long the kids were able to wait before they indulged this temptation to eat the cookies. Well, and by the way, there are lots of really cute and fun YouTube clips of iterations of the study that have happened over the years. Well, this original study was done in the 1960s, and they've been following up with these individuals. So the first check-in was 20 years later. Ultimately, they found that the amount of time they were able to delay their gratification was correlated with all sorts of really positive outcomes. The kids who were able to wait longer had higher grades, higher SAT scores, they got into better colleges, they had stronger social networks, more friends, they had fewer behavioral problems, ultimately telling us that willpower is important. If you can develop willpower early in your life, that has the potential to strengthen your academic performance and all sorts of behaviors that correspond with good outcomes. So then the question was, well, if willpower is important, how can we build willpower in our daily lives? And I want to share with you one of my favorite studies that provided some insight into this. So this was a study done by Baumeister at Carnegie Mellon in the late 90s. He advertised this as a study on taste perception, and he told the participants that they should not eat for at least 3 hours before the experiment. Well, the real reason he told them that was because he wanted to make sure that they would be hungry by the time they got into the lab. Because sure enough, when they stepped foot into the lab, there was a plate of cookies. And again, the reason why researchers use cookies for these studies is because whether you are 4 or 24 or 84, people like cookies. So if you're a hungry college student, you walk into this lab and wafting through the air is the smell of delicious chocolate chip cookies, there's going to be a temptation to indulge the cookies. Well, next to the plate of chocolate chip cookies is a bowl of red, bitter radishes. And half of the participants are in a taste test condition where they are told to eat as many cookies as they want, but not eat the radishes. We'll consider those the lucky participants. Or the other half, which we're told, these cookies are actually for something else, but we have to let them cool right here. Your task is going to be to eat as many of these radishes as you can, but do not eat the cookies. So they spend 5 minutes tasting samples from their assigned dish, either to eat the cookies and not eat the radishes, or to eat the radishes but not eat the cookies. Well, as you can imagine, it's much harder for the people in the condition who have to eat the radishes. Well, in the second part of the study, they're told that this is a puzzle just to pass the time, and they're given these geometric figures, and they're told, trace this geometric figure without retracing any lines and without lifting your pencil from the paper. Well, the puzzles that they were actually given to solve were impossible to solve. There is no way to trace these figures without lifting your pencil. And here again, they were given a bell to ring to move on to the next part of the study when they have reached the point where they didn't want to work at it any longer. Well, as you might have guessed by this point, this was not actually a study on taste perception. This was a study asking the question, is willpower a finite resource? Remember, the earlier study showed us that willpower is important, but if we want to build willpower in our lives, we have to understand a bit more about how you do that, how you build it. So in order to understand whether willpower was a finite resource, ultimately what they were doing in the first part of the study, they were putting half of those participants in a situation where they were going to have to expend some of their willpower. So the individuals who had been told, do not eat the cookies, eat the radishes instead, that requires willpower in order to override that temptation. Well, the second part of the study with the geometric puzzles also requires willpower. When you try something and it doesn't work out the first time, it requires willpower to keep at it and to remain steadfast on that task. Well, when you look at the pattern of data in terms of how long the participants were willing to work at the puzzles, how many attempts they took, what you can see is that the people who had eaten the chocolate chip cookies, they spent much more time. They gave more attempts to the task. The people who had eaten the radishes spent less time and gave fewer attempts. The idea was this: when willpower had been depleted earlier in the experiment, less remained for the subsequent puzzle task. So the question is willpower a finite resource? The answer is a resounding yes. That willpower is ultimately psychological strength. And if we expend that willpower in one area of life, we have less to spend on others. A good analogy is to think about people who are athletes, or specifically runners. If ever you've trained for a long race, usually the training schedule will have you have a period of rest on the day before the race. And the idea is that you don't want to make yourself physically tired right before a race, otherwise your muscles will not be at their full capacity to have a strong race day. We think about psychological strength being very similar. It's important for us to be mindful of where we are expending our time, effort, and energy, because if we put it on menial, unimportant tasks, then less will remain for the more important stuff. There's also been researchers who have looked at the conditions under which people make mistakes in their personal and professional lives. This is not to condone anyone's bad behavior, and this happens regardless of political affiliation, but nonetheless, when researchers examine when people make bad choices in their lives, it's often during times when there are other stressors vying for their attention, which means they have less self-regulatory strength to override other impulses in their lives. Researchers have looked at the conditions under which healthcare providers are most likely to make mistakes in their professional lives, and it's often when there is other stress vying for their attention. And when you look at some of the most successful people, they are aware of this and they build this into how they structure their days. So for example, you might recognize this as an image of Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook. If I were to ask you who he was speaking to here, is this just an informal conversation with some people he knows well, or a huge important meeting that's highly consequential? It is impossible to answer that question just based on what Mark Zuckerberg is wearing, because whether he is talking to business executives or taking a walk in the park with his wife or anywhere else, he wears the same gray t-shirt and blue jeans all the time. And someone once asked him that. They said, "Mark, what's up with the same outfit every day?" Here was his response: "I really want to clear my life to make it so that I have to make as few decisions as possible about anything except how to best serve this community. Even small decisions like choosing what to wear or what to eat for breakfast could be tiring and consume energy. And I don't want to waste any time on that." So there are four major ideas that I want to impress upon you during my time with you this evening. The first one is that when we're talking about building willpower, again, this is that psychological strength that positions us for good grades, good behavior, good outcomes later in life. Don't waste willpower on the menial tasks. That could be stuff like responding to emails that really aren't that important, grocery shopping, other hobbies and chores that maybe aren't as important as other tasks, that like writing a big term paper or doing other things. Put your best energy toward the most important stuff so that it's not spent on the least important stuff. So those are two questions. Here are two questions to ask yourself each day. Number one, think about what are the most important tasks in your day that will require willpower. And number two, what are the unimportant tasks in your day that require willpower? These unimportant tasks are your radishes. And you don't want to waste your good energy on the unimportant stuff, because that means that you'll have less energy, less psychological strength to dedicate to the more important tasks later on. Now, as long as we know that willpower is a finite resource, then the question is, well, how far does this analogy extend? So other researchers have followed this up and found out that sure enough, willpower is like a muscle in that it can be built. So one study that examined this, they enrolled participants in an exercise program. So they gave them membership to a local gym, and they kept track of how often they went to the gym. And in addition to looking at physical outcomes in terms of their physical health, they also took a look at what else was going on psychologically for them in terms of other behaviors that require willpower. And sure enough, they found that when people exercised more, they saw improvements in their dietary habits. They chose the salad over the French fries more often. Their self-care habits, they were more likely to floss their teeth and get other forms of exercise. Their spending habits, they were less likely to do those impulse buys during Amazon trips or getting that candy bar in the grocery store. They had better emotional control. They were less likely to lose their anger. They kept their appointments. A lot of these were college students, so they were less likely to skip a meeting with an advisor. Their study habits also improved. Again, the idea being that if you can strengthen willpower in one area of your life in much the same way that if you go to the gym on a regular basis, your muscles become stronger. And in the short term, yeah, you can't necessarily use them for something immediately after a gym session. You have to build in that time for recovery and repair. But in the long term, the more that you exercise your muscles, the stronger they become. Same thing with psychological willpower muscles. If you can strengthen them in one area of your life that requires discipline and self-control, we tend to see increases in other areas of life. So again, the major idea here is this: incorporating one behavior that requires self-regulatory strength increases self-regulatory strength in other areas of your life. I've been doing some research projects at the university looking at student athletes and performing arts students. And interestingly, what some find to be an ironic outcome is that when you look at the academic performance of student athletes and performing arts students, when they have crazy schedules where student athletes are on the road, they're traveling, they have several hours of practice every day. Same thing with performing arts students. They have hours and hours of rehearsal time in the theater, then they have to go home and study their lines and learn choreography. They have objectively less time to dedicate to their studies or to other activities. And yet it is in the semesters when they are most dedicated to their sport. So in a lot of sports, there's one semester where they're on season, the other semester they're off season. It's typically the semester when they're on season, when they have stronger performance academically. And it's because they have to structure their time so carefully that it requires self-regulatory strength to do that. And the discipline that is required to be successful as an athlete or as a performing arts student, that is an underlying mechanism that becomes strengthened. There's a researcher named Todd Heatherton who's looked at this. He says, when you learn to force yourself to go to the gym or start your homework or eat a salad instead of a hamburger, part of what's happening is that you're changing how you think. People get better at regulating their impulses. They learn how to distract themselves from temptations. And once you've gotten into that willpower groove, your brain is practiced at helping you focus on a goal. And for a lot of us during the pandemic, we didn't have as much structure to our lives. We were able to take meetings while we were doing other stuff because we had a Zoom meeting and then we had something else on a mobile device right next to us, and our attention was divided. Ultimately, and we all are guilty of this, that means that we had less willpower that was being dedicated to the task at hand. So this summer is a great opportunity to build in activities that require willpower, because if you can incorporate more exercise in your routine, if you can choose a salad over a French fry, those are the self-regulatory behaviors that are strengthening the underlying psychological mechanism that during the school year will translate into spending less time on social media or dedicating more time to our studies. So using this summer as an opportunity to build good habits can go a long way toward keeping those willpower muscles strengthened so that we are making better decisions for ourselves once the school year is underway. So that's the second of those four pointers that I want to share with you, is opportunities to develop willpower, everyday behaviors at home, at work, in the grocery store, etc. With the caveat, keeping in mind here, as long as you don't have something big coming up later that day. So if you are going to be making a presentation, or if you're taking a summer class and you know that you're going to have, that you're going to have to put all of your energy toward a big paper or a presentation that evening, go ahead and enjoy the ice cream, or go easier on yourself earlier in the day, so that you have not spent your willpower strength for the day on something small when you have something bigger coming up. All right, the third thing that I want to share with you is there's a lot of research on the importance of creating a schedule and creating to-do lists, which is very valuable, but I want to add a couple of caveats there. Number one, don't put anything on a to-do list without attaching a deadline. There's a huge amount of research showing that a to-do list is only a wish list unless it has a deadline with specific times and dates that are associated with the tasks that you want to accomplish. So if you say, oh yeah, I'm going to get around to reading that book, or I'm going to practice piano at some point, well, you're much more likely to do that if you open up your calendar and say, okay, Tuesday at 6 p.m., that's when I'm going to practice my piano scales, or Wednesday morning is when I'm going to read a couple pages in that book. Because the other thing we know here is that tasks are more consistently done when they are scheduled at the same time each day and broken into steps. This is especially when it comes to tasks and activities that maybe we don't want to do. So kids who have to do chores on a regular basis, kids who are dedicated to some hobby like playing the piano or playing a sport that requires a lot of practice and dedication. Again, that's strengthening that underlying psychological willpower, but not every kid wants to practice their piano skills. Not every kid, of course, wants to do chores when they could be playing video games. But if you can simply establish certain times, okay, we all do our chores Monday mornings from this hour to this hour, and then we do something fun. That's where you are building in a habit that is strengthening that underlying willpower strength. So that's the case for exercising, for chores, for other hobbies that are going to strengthen that willpower that maybe we don't want to do in the short term. If we simply make it part of our routines, it's much more likely to be accomplished over time. And again, every time we do that, that's strengthening that underlying willpower. And the fourth thing that I want to share with you, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. And I'll also just mention, we will have time for questions, so you can feel free to type those into the chat, and Mr. Crimmins will be curating those, and I'll be happy to stick around as long as folks want to discuss this in greater detail. But before we get to the Q&A, I'll just mention my last point here, which is to strengthen mental health by prioritizing physical health. We know that a lot of people's mental health took some hits over the last year. A lot of us saw increases in anxiety and sadness and hopelessness. And so one way for us to get back on track, to build in good habits this summer that can position us to be at our top mental health so that we can be having a strong academic performance during the school year, there are two important ways to prioritize our physical health. One is by getting exercise on a regular basis. When we exercise, the brain releases neurochemicals that are ultimately the brain and body's natural feel-good chemicals like endorphins and serotonin. And there's a research scientist who is a physician named John Rady. He's written this great book called Spark. But I want to share with you a quote from his book that I think summarizes a lot of what researchers have identified about the psychological benefits of exercise. He says, in a way, exercise can be thought of as a psychiatrist's dream treatment. It works on anxiety, on panic disorder, and on stress in general, which has a lot to do with depression. And it generates the release of neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine, that are very similar to our most important psychiatric medicines. Having a bout of exercise is like taking a little bit of Prozac and a little bit of Ritalin right where it is supposed to go. And for the record, I am in no way suggesting that we should get rid of our psychiatric medications, but the reason why psychiatric drugs like Prozac and Ritalin work is because they are simply mimicking patterns of neural firing and the release of neurochemicals that the brain naturally is able to do on its own. And so a very effective way to release neurochemicals in the brain that can boost our mood and put the brakes on anxiety or sadness, or that increase focus on a task at hand, a very effective way to do that is simply by getting exercise. When we exercise on a regular basis, again, that is activating the exact same neurochemicals that these other drugs are doing, except it's coming free of charge. I am in no way suggesting that it's a bad thing if you or someone you know is on these drugs. I'm simply saying that if you are physically able to incorporate physical activity, our best research shows us, not for everybody, some people need the drugs, but for a lot of people, exercise by itself can go a long way in having these exact same effects. So how much exercise do we need? We've all been paying a lot of attention to the CDC lately. They also offer recommendations on how much physical activity we should be getting. They say, again, this is good anytime, but especially this summer when the temptation might be to fall out of routines, 5 days a week, we want to be getting 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity. Now, that does not mean you have to go run a marathon every day. That could simply mean a brisk walk around the neighborhood. And the good news here is that the 30 minutes doesn't even have to be all in one fell swoop. You can break that into increments as small as 10 minutes at a time. And if it accumulates to 30 minutes over the course of the day, that's hitting that target, both for our physical health and also our psychological health, both in terms of putting the brakes on anxiety, increasing our happiness, and importantly, it is strengthening our self-regulatory strength. It is strengthening our willpower. If you commit to doing this over the summer, your willpower muscles are going to be very strong to position you for academic success during the school year. Part of the reason why exercise is so celebrated by psychologists is because exercise has been shown to be very effective at overcoming psychological disorders like depression and anxiety, but it's also very effective for people who are not affected by those disorders, but feel pretty good, but simply want to feel happier. So in case you've tuned out for like the last 5 minutes, I'll summarize everything I just said with this meme. Had a bad day, go to the gym. Had a good day, go to the gym. Either way, physical activity, very important for psychological health. The final behavior I'll mention that's important for physical health and mental health is sleep. A lot of people say, oh, yeah, I know sleep's important, but I'm just too busy to get a good night's sleep on a regular basis. Or my nephews tell me, we have too much homework being SLUH students to get enough sleep on a regular basis. If you feel that way, you're in good company. It was Margaret Thatcher who once said, sleep is for wimps. Thomas Edison, who said, sleep is a criminal waste of time. And this is consistent with what conventional wisdom told us for a long time. We used to think that sleep was this passive activity and that it was the act of doing nothing for 8 hours at night that gave us a chance to sort of to take a break from the hustle and bustle of daily life and catch our breath and then have energy for the next day. But it turns out when you look at the research from neuroscience, when we are sleeping, our brains are incredibly active. Our brains are doing all sorts of really important work to strengthen neural circuits that ultimately play out in emotion regulation and mental acuity. It's the reason why if we haven't slept well on a given night, the next day we're irritable, we can't focus on our work, we can't get as much work done. It's because we didn't give our brains the time they needed the night before to do that work that plays out in helping us feel good and do good work. A study that I like to share, I did this a bunch of years ago with WashU undergraduates. I've replicated it every year. This is looking at the first 15 weeks of the fall semester. So this is like August, September, October, November, December. This is how much sleep they're getting. You can see what happens to this value. So the first week of the semester, they're getting almost 7 hours of sleep, but over the first month and a half, goes way down, bumps around for a little bit, hits a spike at week 14. This is Thanksgiving when we don't have class for that week, but they come back for the final week of the semester and it's right back down to where it had been earlier. Well, in addition to looking at just how much sleep the students get, I also look at what else is going on in their lives psychologically. On the weeks when the students get more sleep, they report feeling more in charge, less overwhelmed. They report feeling more positive emotions. They're more engaged at school, have a better idea of what's going on in the class. They're more successful academically, and they feel more optimism about the upcoming week for papers and exams they have coming up. All of this is consistent with what neuroscience has told us about the kind of work that the brain is doing when we're sleeping. It is not a passive activity. It's actually very important both for our mental health and our cognitive health, those cognitive growth spurts that Mr. Kempf was talking about earlier. So how much sleep do we need? 7 to 8 hours per night, every night. And for teenagers and adolescents, a lot of research says it's closer to 9 to 10 hours a night, every night. And in the summer, of course, as a former teenager, I know, I get it. It's, you want to stay up all the time, but to the extent to which it's possible to develop good sleep habits on a regular basis so that by the time the school year rolls around, you're used to getting a good night's sleep every night of the week. That's really important for emotional and cognitive health also. The idea of I'll catch up on sleep over the weekend, there's no such thing as catching up on sleep. The sleep deficit you carry with you and it plays out and often has unfortunate consequences, both emotionally for behavioral issues, but also on a cognitive level. So consistently getting a good night's sleep every night of the week, going to bed and getting up around the same hour, very valuable. All right, so these are the 4 tasks that I wanted to share with you. Remember, willpower is something that can be strengthened, but don't waste it on the small stuff. Find opportunities to develop willpower. It's just like a muscle that you work out at the gym. If you can strengthen it in one area of your life, like taking up a hobby or a sport or chores around the house, that's how you keep your willpower muscles strong, which then positions you to stay on task toward your problem sets in calculus or the big term paper for your English class. Set deadlines and establish routines. Again, even for the stuff you don't want to do the chores, you don't want to practice your piano scales, just carve out the same time every day or on certain days of the week. You're much more likely to accomplish them that way. Reward yourself with something special for ice cream or an activity that you really enjoy. But those are the ways to build your willpower ultimately. And the other good ways to build willpower are to strengthen your mental health by prioritizing physical health. At least 30 minutes of physical activity that's accumulated over the course of the day and a full 8 hours of sleep every night of the week, not just catching up. over the weekend. Final thing I want to do is share with you a quote that this is a professor at UC Berkeley that he gave to a group of college freshmen a couple years ago, and I think it fits here. He told the students on the first day of class, right now, you are constructing the person you're going to be for the rest of your life. Human behavior is mostly a matter of habits. People talk as if you make big decisions all the time about what you do. That's not true. Almost all the time, you just do what you're in the habit of doing. So this summer is a great opportunity. Again, remember that article from The Guardian I shared with you at the beginning? Everybody's willpower has fallen to the wayside over the last year. This summer is a great opportunity to strengthen willpower by building in good habits around exercise and diet, chores, other behaviors that strengthen that self-regulatory strength. If we can get that into shape this summer, you'll be in a great position at the start of junior year this fall to be successful academically and in terms of your other activities as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. If you would like to learn more information, I happen to have written a book on this topic. There's a chapter on willpower along with some other chapters on psychological health and well-being, or you can feel free to email me, tjbono@wistl.edu, or if you see Joey and Vince in the hallway, just ask your questions to them and they'll send me a text or something and we'll answer them that way. So thank you again for the invitation to be with you. Ms. Floyd, I'll turn things back over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Bono. I'm going to ask for Mr. Crimmins' help here to see if questions came in through the chat. So do you have anything for Dr. Bono at the moment, Mr. Crimmins?
At the moment, I do not. So I guess I'd just like to put an open call for any questions that there may be. If none, that is also okay. It's been a very long year and willpower and focus is probably quite depleted at 8 p.m. on a Thursday. So I think our research is playing out quite appropriately at this point.
I do want to ask just a real quick question for Dr. Bono. I'm putting on my parent hat and then I'm going in the Wayback Machine for a little bit. I know normally summertime was not a time of sleep deprivation. Summertime was probably a time of too much sleep. And it kind of reminded me of when my kids were tiny little babies when they would change day for night and getting so any dangers of oversleeping?
That's a great question, Ms. Floyd. Yeah, because certainly that can be part of the issue. That can run counter to what we know about good sleep hygiene. And yes, it is possible to sleep too much. Now, again, we have to balance the reality that teenagers are going to stay up and they're going to hang out late and do all of those behaviors as well.
And they're missing that. They've missed that. They have friend deficit disorder in terms of time.
I think that might end up being a diagnostic category that psychologists start diagnosing as friend deficit disorder, especially this summer. Yeah. So yes, it's so important to spend time with your friends, and sometimes that will inevitably go into late hours of the night. And in college, that'll happen. You'll stay up until 2 a.m. talking about life, and that's certainly part of the experience. But I think that what's important is to take note of the extent to which that's affecting other behaviors and their ability to stay on task toward other important things that they should be accomplishing. So if they have a summer job, if they have other commitments, if there are expectations around chores or hobbies or family gatherings, if you should find that they are falling behind in other areas, that's where you want to start taking a look at things like how much sleep are they getting? What do their sleep patterns look like? How much exercise are they getting? What are the other opportunities that might exist to modify their schedules or just the way that their days are structured to build in a little bit more self-regulatory strength so that they can make good on the other obligations that they have. So it's really a matter of how is it affecting family dynamics and other obligations. But yeah, absolutely, we all need to sleep in until noon some days, and that's perfectly okay too. I have a colleague who says everything in moderation, including moderation, and I think that applies to sleep as well. But as you get closer to the school year, maybe by late July or into August, that's maybe where you want to think about, all right, let's, whatever your sleep pattern is now, no judgment, but let's try to scale that back a little bit so that we're, in a good position to feel well rested for the day, because that truly is one of the most important ways to position yourself for success before a school day, is to make sure that your brain had a full 8 to 9 hours to do the work it needs to do to position you to take in the rigor of a place like SLUH.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bono. Anything else, Mr. Crimmins?
I do have two questions that came in real quick. So
Great.
the first is around motivation, teenagers, and we talked about the importance of a schedule and building these habits. Do you have any advice for working with teens or young adults and finding ways to increase that motivation should it seem to be lacking?
Yeah, you mean that there might be some unmotivated teenagers? I'm not sure. Yeah, I know. It's shocking.
I've never experienced such a thing.
Yeah, working in high school too. That's a really tough one because we do know that one of the biggest predictors of behavior change is motivation. If somebody is not motivated to play the piano or to read a book or to do a chore, it's going to be very difficult to get them to do it. So, and especially in the teenage years, we've been taught, this whole presentation has been about impulse control, but biologically what's necessary for us to override impulses is a brain structure called the prefrontal cortex. And that brain structure is not fully developed until like the early to mid 20s. And for young men, it develops even later. And so that can be especially a challenge for teenage boys to always be in a position to remain motivated and override their impulses. But the good news is that it can be done. So one very effective way to do it is to have a conversation, to ask the individual, what are your long-term goals? What are other goals you have for yourself? And if you can help them understand how a particular behavior is positioning them to build skills that are ultimately going to lead toward an outcome that they see for themselves down the road, then they understand the bigger picture. That can be one way to do it. Another way to do it is by providing examples of other people who your kid looks up to or likes or admires. And maybe that's you as the parent to say, here's, when I was your age, or here's another kid who also had a similar goal. Here's how they put a structure to their day, or here's how they found the motivation to do this. Providing models is incredibly powerful because it provides the kids sort of a set of behaviors that they can follow to stay on track toward that goal. So, and one thing that I'll also add to that can be very effective is not only a model of how to get there, but also models of people who have tried it, failed, and then figured out a way to get back on track. Because the temptation often is to see somebody who was successful and say, oh, well, that person, went to this great college and did all these amazing things. Well, I'll never be able to do that. But if you can tie in, oh, and by the way, when they were a freshman at SLUH, they struggled in this class. They had these difficulties, but here's how they were able to turn that around. It helps them understand hope is not lost if there have been some stumbles along the road. There is a path forward from that. So providing models and tying it to their bigger goals, that's easier said than done sometimes, but sometimes with the teenagers, it's a matter of getting them through it. But even if they don't enact the behavior, then they're very likely still hearing the message. And eventually, when that prefrontal cortex develops, they'll be in a position to do it.
Awesome. One other follow-up question. We talked a lot about, building good habits, and a question here about how important is it kind of to eat on a habit or eat at regular times? And is that scheduling of meals or does food fit in with that good habit or schedule building?
Great question. Yeah. So food is important for a variety of reasons. I mean, what's most important probably is to listen to your body. But one of the things that we know, again, to override our impulses is that our brain needs fuel to do that. And we need good fuel to do that. So, it's true that eating a candy bar or drinking, a Coke will give you a rush of sugar and increase your glucose supply, but you'll experience a crash almost as quickly. So having, good whole grain meals, good, a diet with fruits and vegetables, that's the good kind of glucose that can really provide the fuel to stay on track toward those other activities. I think that in terms of particular times of day, often if you do have meals that are structured, that can often anchor the activities that otherwise are taking place. So you say, all right, we're going to do our morning chores, then we're going to have a nice lunch, and then we're going to watch a movie, or we're going to go to the park, we're going to do something that we enjoy. That can be a motivating factor, and also build in that structure, those routines. Something, activities become less painful if it's just a routine, because it's not, I guess I'll get around to doing that eventually. It's no, okay, we're all going to do this as a family, we're going to do our chores, then we have things to look forward to. One other idea that came up, I'll mention very quickly, is the importance of autonomy. Mr. Kempf also talked about this identity formation, kids who are sort of turning away from their parents or turning away from hobbies. That's very common in the teenage years, because part of identity development for a teenager is autonomy. And you can use that as a parent by saying, okay, so you get to make a decision about, are you going to do this chore today? Are you going to do it at this hour or at this hour? So you're still giving them some autonomy versus handing it to them with an iron fist and saying, this is what you have to do. You can still build in autonomy, but ultimately the activity is one that will strengthen their self-regulatory strength.
Excellent. I think that wraps up a lot of the questions. If you wouldn't mind, I had one more question about what was the name of that book again and where do I find it? Otherwise, a couple of messages of thank you so very much, Mr. Bono, Dr. Bono, and for being here this evening. We really appreciate everything you've done for us.
Well, it's truly my pleasure. I always enjoy partnering with SLUH, especially since I have family there now. So is it okay if I just type it into the chat? So it's called Happiness 101. Or just email me directly, and I'm always happy if a question comes up later. But you can find that at Amazon or any local bookstore. You should be able, there's a chapter on willpower. All the topics I teach in my positive psychology class at WashU are summarized, along with stories of how students have put that into their practice and into their own lives.
I'll put the link in the follow-up email tomorrow, and I'll also link it on the YouTube recording. So
great, that sounds great.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you again, Dr. Bono. Thank you, Mr. Mueller, Mr. Kempf, college counselors. And so I appreciate everybody being here tonight. And we look forward, sophomores, and now rising juniors, we look forward to working with you and your families. Good night, everybody.
Good night.